Hey, all you Ethic cuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think you can change the world by changing our workplaces, I got a real treat for you. We got the one and only Amii Barnard-Bahn. Amii, how's it going? Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you. So happy to be here.
So we are out of the studio today. We are at our company-wide summit. If it sounds like I have a cold, I don't. I have karaoke voice. We had our karaoke outing to kick off our summit last night, and boy, was I singing. So we are going to dive right in. We're going to be talking. Did you?
Yeah, after Thanksgiving.
We're going to be diving in this topic so important to so many who often uncover bad news. How do we get better at delivering that bad news with confidence and with the context to create not only a perception that we know what we're doing and that we have it handled, but also that there's a path forward and we can close that loop. So we're going to run through a couple of quick announcements. As we always say, your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. So go ahead and drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat and connect with at least one person. I was at the Resility conference in New York this week. If those of you who weren't able to make it, I really encourage you to go to the next one. It was absolutely phenomenal. The energy in the room was great. The topics, the discussion topics were absolutely phenomenal, and everybody left there feeling really energized to push past this tipping point that we're at. But there were multiple people who came to me during that conference and they said, man, I know everybody at my table from the Ethicsverse. So that's what this thing is supposed to be. Every Thursday we can get together and we can recharge and we can sharpen our sword, sharpen our saw a little bit, and connect with some folks. So connect with somebody today. Take advantage of this unique thing that we have in our marketplace, which is this collegial community that we're all a part of. And also take advantage of all of this great thought leadership that's out there. There are great podcasts that I'm listening to every single week that make me sound smarter, that give me the right perspective. And if you're not working any of these things into your rotation, you really should be. So the Great Women in Compliance podcast is launched. The Unless podcast by Hema Lomax is launched. That's phenomenal. So check those things out. Here's our QR code for our socials and our books and things like that. Also, the Ethics Experts has a new episode out with Emily Frank. If you haven't checked this out, you absolutely should be subscribed to our YouTube channel so you see what content you may have missed over the last week. You can also, of course, download this. By the way, the Ethics Experts is the top team, and round of applause for all of our guests that bring so much value on this platform. So if you haven't checked that out, go ahead and do it. So we talk about this battleground. I've been talking about this battleground for the last couple of months. Probably going to be talking about it throughout all of the next year. Hopefully we can get some movement there. But I was at the conference and Pat Harned of ECI was there. She was the keynote speaker, and she was going through all of this data that came out of some recent, global business survey, studies that they did. And the continual refrain, the constant refrain was that we are not making the movement on the cultures of integrity that we are trying to build. We as an industry aren't making the progress that we're trying to make. And this is Pat's words, okay? This is not even me. So this is corroborating what I've been saying. And it's because middle managers are stopping us, okay? Middle managers are not actualized and they're not activated to be that sort of that strategic lever that's pushing our culture of integrity forward. So people are 6 to 8 times more likely to bring some risk intelligence to their direct manager than they are to go to this anonymous channel that you have in place. So at this conference on how do we kind of start to activate these middle managers? Well, lucky for you, your good friends at Ethico put together this phenomenal not my words. I've just gotten so much great feedback about this. We put together this phenomenal middle managers toolkit that has a lot of the building blocks that you can download, that you can start implementing to fast forward the activation of those middle managers. That can feel like a very amorphous, insurmountable task. Like, how do I get these folks to start singing this song of integrity that we're trying to sing across our organization? So I would really encourage you to download this here. It was even mentioned in Hema's new book. So that wasn't even a paid promotion. Okay, that was real. The Ethico ecosystem is your answer to the pains that you have right now. So, the constant pains that we hear across the board are from folks who are they feel like what they bought is not what they're living in right now. They don't have the partnership that they need in order to have that impact and make their world a better workplace. They have tools that are too manual, things like that. There are many, in 70 to 75% of the cases, folks are on a tool that hasn't been updated in literally 5 to 7 years. So if you want to see what else is out there, if you have a contract that's expiring in the next 12 months, I'd encourage you to reach out to us and take advantage of the Promised Land promotion. You've been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And there's a land of milk and honey right over there. So we want to make it easy for you if you're with Navex or Conversant/OneTrust to make that change. We'll do a contract buyout for you. We even do a 15% reduction to our list price as a result. We want to make sure that, it's amazing what smart people who care are able to do when they have tools that actually work for them versus having tools that they are working for. We are giving away books. The world famous Ethico book giveaway, of course, is in live effect today. We're giving away Amy's book, the PI Guidebook. So if you have not checked this out, get active in the chat. Because this book has really changed my life. It's a really great workbook to really kind of do that self-assessment, to do some of that journaling and reframe what it's going to take to get unstuck. If you feel like your wheels are spinning in your career advancement, if you feel like you're hitting a glass ceiling, there's probably something that you can do to change the way that you interact in your organization. And this is a great guidebook for that. So of course, we're giving away 5 of those because we love you. And we got another book. Amy, why don't you show that other book that we're going to be giving out and tell us a little bit about that book? Because
I am so excited about this one.
Can you guys... We're doubling the giveaway. Yeah.
Can you see my screen? Okay. So Modern Achievement was written by 2 of my dear friends from my Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches Network that I'm privileged to be in. Marshall Goldsmith's the #1 executive coach in the world. He's giving away everything he knows for free. He's in his legacy years and he worked with Peter Drucker. He's just a phenomenal resource and my mentor. And then Ashish Advani, who is the CEO of Junior Achievement Worldwide, which is dedicated to entrepreneurship globally for young people and teaching them finance and business and helping entrepreneurship spring up everywhere. And I was privileged to have what we're going to be talking about today in his book as one of his chapters. He and I just presented at the Peter Drucker Forum in Vienna. He presented around his flexible, freestyle, and fixed model, which he feels is the new way of business, especially with Gen Z and how things are thinking, that certain things are fixed and you need to communicate that to your employees. Certain things are flexible and you can negotiate that. And certain things are freestyle and you just don't kind of know what you can plan on in business. And I know, Nick, you know that as an entrepreneur as well. So it's got wonderful lessons from many, many thought leaders with tons of experience. And I really appreciate you giving it away and spreading the word. It's all of the profits for that book go to Junior Achievement Worldwide.
Amazing. I love that organization. I just got a note in. Round of applause for all of us Ethicuties. We have a new record for registrants for a webinar. So Amy really does bring a crowd. We almost have 3,000 registrants for this thing. So keep spreading the word. Invite your team. There's a great place to come every single Thursday. All right. So check out, is it the new one up here? Yeah. Okay, hold on 1 second, sorry. I don't have my normal setup, so you got to bear with me a little bit. I'm on the road. So check out Amii Barnard Consulting. Hit that top QR code. She really does help great leaders become great. I don't know if you know Amy. Let me give a little introduction to you. Here's me. Look at that. Baby-faced. I'm baby-faced. Okay. And then here's Amii Barnard-Bahn. So Amy's somebody that I met several years ago. I've learned so much from her. And she has this really unique perspective where she can, she worked in HR in some really large companies. She worked in compliance in some really large companies. And she has this really great strategic mindset on how to be this perfect courtier while being highly effective. So like I said, she's somebody that she's a massive thought leader in our space, not only in ethics and compliance in HR, but also in the coaching space. And so we're just so happy to have you here, Amy.
Thank you. It's always fun. And I love our community. So anything I can do to give back, I'm happy to.
So we're gonna start talking about this framework that Amy came up with.
Yeah.
And this framework, there was, this has been kind of top of mind because I've been having a lot of conversations with, prospective, clients and with existing clients. And even at this conference that I was at, this was like a common refrain, like, there's so much anxiety around how we deliver bad news. Many times us in risk management, us as the circulatory system of the organization that is designed to crowdsource this risk intelligence and provide those insights back to the point of risk, we are often the ones who are finding out about these bad things first, right? Like in many ways, we're the smoke detectors and we have to start, and everybody kind of hates the beeping of a smoke detector, right? But so it creates a lot of anxiety for us when we have to deliver this bad news and we have to balance like what's best for the organization, what's best for my career, how do I not look stupid, how do I not unintentionally cause my audience to overreact. And so Amy's come up with this phenomenal 6-step program that we're going to be walking through today. So I am sure that this is going to be going to resonate with a lot of you because all of us have had to deliver this kind of bad news. anytime you have a boss, there's bad news to deliver because business is complex and business is difficult. So I would really like your comments. And I'd like to try to keep this very organic like we always do. But the more we can do to add value to our audience every single week, we take that very, very seriously. So please tell us, share your stories, share your anecdotes, share questions you might have, and we can workshop some of these things because Amii is great, with these pop-up coaching. Like I've called Amii before and I said, hey, what would you do about this? And like she tells me in 5 minutes something that, me journaling for freaking 2 hours, would take otherwise. So let's keep this organic. Let's sharpen our sword and let's dive in here. So Amii, why don't you walk us through our agenda and we'll get moving.
Yeah, I'd love to walk through the 6 steps and then take anybody's questions. So I can tell you, first of all, that the compliance and ethics profession inspired me to dig deep into this research. And I worked to get to this model up for about 3 years. We all know the concept of psychological safety. And we all know how I've worked very hard with Joe Murphy and around how do we create a perfect whistleblowing system that protects people from retaliation. What I felt was missing, and I've had the pleasure of working with Amy Edmondson and Megan Reitz, Amii being, really the person who coined the term psychological safety from her book a few years ago. And what I found that what I knew was missing from working in organizations is that soft kind of both retaliation against bad news deliverers. It's just a phenomenon that I observed that's pernicious. And concurrently also the concern that bad news doesn't always get to the right people to make the right decisions. CEOs get thrown a lot of stuff and they find it very hard to sort through. And so I observed that less attention had been paid on the actual moment, the critical moments of when you have to deliver the bad news and the importance of creating psychological safety for your audience so they can hear you. So it's a little more nuanced, but I feel it does 2 things. Number one, my goal is for this information, and it's flexible. I do have a system here so that you have something to refer to, and I tried to keep it really simple, but it can be applied in multiple circumstances. And the idea is that you get heard without the potential political backlash, which I'll go into in a minute. The neuroscience around that is fascinating and disturbing. And the ability of the leaders to hear you in a way where they support you or them taking the right action when it's a really business case critical, bet the farm kind of situation, which we get into sometimes, right? There's the everyday, and then there's the hopefully once every few years at most, the really difficult conversations. So that's some background. So step 1, so we find that with neuroscience that negative events impact people 5 times more than positive events. So, and when people are surprised by a negative event, they attribute that potentially to you, to the messenger. There is actually truth in the phrase, shoot the messenger. For any of you who love Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and Shakespeare, you'll know some moments about that. When a person is delivering bad news, the person receiving it ascribes ill intent to the deliverer. It's not logical. It's monkey brain stuff, but it happens because we need to make meaning of events, and apparently when we're shocked and surprised, it's even worse. So we need to be aware going in that that's potentially an issue, and these steps will set you up to potentially overcome as best as possible any of that potential dynamic that could be going on in your organization. So starting with number 1, psychologically prepare your audience. It's really important, and I can give some personal examples that I think will resonate, to not shock people when you're delivering bad news. And it could be everything from, we need to lay off some people, HR has this all the time, unfortunately, or we just got a lawsuit from our biggest client, or we just lost our biggest client, or, which could only be in sales, or it could be, we just got hit with a huge fine, or we're about to be raided, which happened to me with people showing up with the FBI showing up with, or FDA actually showing up with guns at one of my distribution centers one day. Those are big messages, right, to give to your boss, the board, the CEO. So what you want to do, and it's very simple, but it's very important not to skip this stuff, give people a beat to let them know something bad is coming. It can be super simple, like, hey, I need to talk to you. I've got some tough news. And then just pause, and they'll usually go, okay, hit me. And then you move on, and we can talk about the next steps. But it's very important. And for example, think about when you're walking down the street with your best friend, and you're just, you're planning to meet them for a nice lunch, and they say, by the way, I'm getting a divorce. And you've known this person for like 20 years. You've had, Thanksgiving with their family. Like, often, won't you stop physically and like you stop walking, and you'll be like, what? So that's shocking people. And we actually freeze when our brains are shocked. We freeze for 1/26th of a second. We literally can't think straight. And then we potentially go into another mode. You want to avoid that. You want people to be with you and be present in the conversation. You can do that and avoid that shock by saying, hey, I got to tell you something tough. Or I wish I had better news is one that I've used a lot when my leader knows that there's something going on that could go good or bad.
So I got to tell you something, Amy. We were prepping for this one before I had my accident, and you were talking about this thing.
We were.
And
yeah.
I don't think I told you this, but like literally the hardest phone call I ever had to make was the phone call to my wife when I was in the emergency room, telling her I got in an accident, I totaled the car, and like my neck was broken. Like I was so anxious to make that call because she's going to assume the worst, and I don't want to scare her and put that burden on her, and I used this thing. I used what you're talking about, and I, consciously was like, hey, this is going to be a tough conversation. I have some some really bad news. And it just helped to kind of level set it. I mean, it was at freaking 3 a.m. So I'm saying it works even at 3:30 in the morning. This works at all times, but it's such a powerful thing to give somebody a heads up of like what's coming. And again, like our job is so much of our job is persuasion, influence. All of those things boil down to framing. Like, how am I framing this picture? And we have to kind of put that frame up before we start filling in the details of that picture.
Yes.
Many times we just kind of tend to jump in and start putting kind of paint on the canvas. And people are like, what even is this? I don't even know what this is. That frame can do a lot for you, to your point, to make sure that whoever you're delivering the bad news to, whatever, they're walking with you in it, and you're not getting caught up in that 25, that 0.26 seconds, which can feel like an eternity if you're on the other end of it. You know what I mean?
It does. It immediately hijacks your amygdala, and they literally may not hear anything else afterwards. So it decreases your respect as a leader, which we never want for our compliance colleagues. It's kind of disrespectful if you think about it that way. It can be, we're thinking about ourselves. We're worried so much about, oh my God, this is terrifying. You've got to think about your audience. It's for them, right? You already know the bad news. What are you doing for them to make them feel psychologically safe, having a level-headed conversation about this? And what are you doing to express your executive presence? Because this is one of those moments, one of those crucible moments where you show who you are as a leader.
So I have a great question from the chat here.
Okay.
And I'd love to apply, I'd love to talk about this question in the context of this first step, because I think, let me just ask the question. If leaders are fascist kind of leaders, what do you do then? How do you change this first step for that type versus another type? Do you think it's any different, or do you think it's going to be the same thing because it's really an amygdala, a kind of like alligator brain or lizard brain response? Like, would you cater that sort of framing, that initial step, any different depending on what type of leader you're speaking to? Or is it just kind of across the board?
That step I would not, but there are others that I can talk about that I would. Okay. I would be very direct. I would realize you have a very skeptical audience that's ready to attack. And that's going to be important in some of our other steps.
See, this is what I'm talking about. Just that frame right there. Just kind of getting into the mind of the person you're talking to quickly and having some kind of a sketch for like what kind of strategic path your persuasion path is going to take. Just, it does so much versus just dumping it on somebody. Okay, so we're talking about giving a heads up, giving some context for the situation to align expectations. What do you mean by that, by providing that context?
Well, so let's see. By providing context, can you repeat, Nick?
Yeah, the second bullet says, provide context for the situation to align expectations. Where do folks go wrong with that without that kind of, context?
So my second step is around rehearsing confident delivery, and that can include thinking about your context, thinking about who you're speaking to, really getting your message down. I will caveat this by saying sometimes you don't have the luxury of time, and I appreciate that. And that's why I'm trying to give this to you early before you need it, right? We all need solutions before we need it and frameworks to help us. But when you have the ability, even if it's 24 hours, 2 hours, whatever it is, I've helped my coaching clients with this. I'll get ad hoc coaching calls like, hey, I've got a meeting with the board in 5 minutes. Like the Boeing crisis. I have a CEO successor client in aerospace for a parts supplier. You can imagine that the Boeing situation really impacted this person, and they're the COO of their organization. So we prepped for their meeting with their COO, who's reactive, who's cynical, who loves to yell. So, we prepped for that. So we rehearsed. We did role play, and I played his boss, whom I've met and I know, and I get his style. And we did it, and I gave him feedback. I said, okay, client, this is where I'd use this word. This is where I'd tighten this up, because he's going to be like, and let's get it tight, and let's get your nerves out and your fear out of this. So rehearsing confident delivery for really tough conversations is so critical. And I recommend anyone who's read my book knows that for critical conversation, I always recommend you recording it. So easy with Zoom or with our cell phones these days. Record once you've got your bullet points of what must I say. And then I have this, must say, need to say, and want to say, and you divide those three things up, because you never know how much time you're going to get, especially with a senior audience. So you have to figure out, what ultimately do I need to say? Must I say? What would I like to say? What's a little extra context? And then, what do I want? And those are prioritized, again, depending on how much time you have. So I recommend that you rehearse it and record yourself practicing to your audience, saying, and look at it 3 times. You look at it once with the sound off, so that you can see your body language, especially if you have to deliver this on Zoom. That can be very important. Rolling your shoulders back, being centered on the camera like I am, with about 2 fingers from the top of your head to here, having really good lighting on your face. Having a well-lit face increases trust. We're again, the animal wiring is that we do not trust people in the dark. Mm-hmm. Not having a messy background. There's just these important basic things about
not the camera pointed up your nostrils, for example.
Oh my God, yeah. Looking professional, looking organized, right? Because people make judgments. If you look disorganized, they think your thinking is disorganized, rightly or wrongly. These are assumptions we make, especially if we have limited contact with people. These interactions are very important. Then I recommend watching it a second time with only listening to the sound. Listen to your voice. Do you have the right tone? Are you conveying confidence and yet the right amount of empathy if it's a really bad problem? If you had a hand in it, or your team had a hand in creating the bad situation, you want to seem a bit contrite without being, a jello mess on the floor. Right. And you want to do this. So conveying, rehearsing, which I find personally, even I procrastinate rehearsing. It's one of my things I'm working on. But whenever I do, I'm so glad that I've done it. And then you watch it the third time all together, and you say, okay, am I coming across as the leader I want to be, with the right amount of gravitas, empathy, and action-oriented idea to this situation? Super helpful. And it will get rid of your jitters by at least 50%. And remember, the messaging is about your audience, not about you. You have important information. You want to convey it in a way that they either listen to you and take your recommendation or take the action they need to if you are not empowered to actually fix the situation.
Well, there's a reason that Broadway plays do dress rehearsals before opening night. You want to make sure it all kind of works and vibes together. And to your point, just going through it once and, again, the three things are listen to it or watch it, no sound. Listen to it. I almost gave you guys the middle finger. Listen to it listen to it, no video, and then look at it all together. And if you're taking some notes, this is like really the fastest way to 10x the efficacy of your presentation. If by nothing else, to your point, you have gone through it, your subconscious has sort of, kind of like tried that on for size a little bit. Back to the last slide really quick. We have to keep in mind that, relative to this context, we have to at least remember and understand that we probably have a much deeper understanding to the details and the nuance in our little corner of the world than does the person that we're talking to. And so what we don't want to do is just dump on them and cross our fingers and hope that they do all the arithmetic as they're sorting through the words and trying to understand, is this a big problem? Is this a small problem? Is this going to wreck my own career? Or is this something that we just need to sort of stamp out? We don't want to let them kind of wander through our words. We want to make it a lot easier for them. So dumbing it down and just simply recognizing that they probably don't have all the context. They probably don't know all the controls in place and all the processes that you have in place on your side of the fence can help you to convey it in a more clear way, in a more digestible way. Because again, dumping a bucket on somebody doesn't really quench their thirst. They have to be able to take those sips to quench the thirst. Yeah.
Terrific. That's great points, Nick. Yeah. And again, given the bias towards bad news messengers, we already a bit have an uphill battle here. And there's an extra component for compliance and ethics officers and lawyers, which is there's additional social science research that shows that to a great extent, people that are viewed as choosing norm defying roles, and norms in this case being people who want to get along with people who are seen as positive, we are viewed, and I think we know this because we talk about the risk of being viewed as a cop versus the mayor by the organization. We are viewed as having chosen a role that will regularly be delivering bad news. So that works against us as well, with this belief that bad news messengers somehow wanted the event to happen. And I believe we will be giving a link. My deeper article that has the 3 years of research and interviews with people that I base this on is on this Leader to Leader professional business magazine that was started by Peter Drucker and Frances Hesselbein. And I have, happily as an author, they don't always do this, it's an expensive journal subscription, but I have a link that goes past the paywall that they've given to me as an author that we should post, Nick, because we don't have time to go into them, but I have great stories, y'all, that will help you remember these 6 principles, and they're fascinating stories. Everything from, my friend who was a general in Afghanistan to bankers on Wall Street, just some really great stories that will illustrate each of these steps and why they're important, and give you those stories that are quite memorable and fun to read.
And so that article will be sent around along with the slides to all Ethicsverse members.
Perfect.
So if you're not a member yet, just sign up and be a member. It's free, so you can get your eyes and your hands on that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about recording ourselves. We talked about aiming for being composed and authoritative presence that conveys genuine concern. Let's jump to the next one, if you want, here, about being fully present and fully focused.
Yeah, being present and fully focused. Again, some people, through human nature, wanting to avoid pain, right? That's something on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We know that we do that. So we want to hit that head on with ourselves and say, nope, I can't avoid this. I need to be present and focused. I can't be allowing my mind to wander, even though I would rather be anywhere else right now than where I am, right? Sitting in front of this person saying, we've got a real problem here. So number one, you always want to prioritize face-to-face. You want to focus on the method of delivery. Of course, in our remote hybrid world and being global, that's not always possible. So the second best is video, face-to-face on video. Because then you can pay attention to body cues, people's voice, how they're responding in the moment. if they don't get something you said, they can respond right away. You can't do that if you send it in an email or a voicemail. So really, 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 depending on, and use your judgment, of course. Is this a 10 problem out of 10, or is it a 2? Okay, so I'm not saying this applies equally to all things, but for the really big ones, you're going to want to do this. You want to stay calm and composed, even in really tense situations. Even if you're personally upset, you can convey that verbally, but it's better to get that stuff out. That's the practice part too, as well. Like, if you're really upset about it, you want to get that out of your body before you're presenting. Because you need to allow them to be upset, right? This is the empathy for, okay, they might be hearing this for the first time. They might be angry. They might be sad. You never know. You probably know a little bit if you've worked with them well. So you want to be prepared to clarify and address immediate concerns.
Paying attention to that body language is so critical. It's obviously harder to break up with someone face to face than it is to just send a text and block them on your phone. Okay. So, but if we're erring on the side of, email correspondence to deliver the bad news versus face to face, I think you have to really reflect on like what's behind that. Is that you're trying to, avoid an uncomfortable situation for yourself? If that's the case, how does that correspond with the mandate you have for your job to sometimes have, just by its nature, be the bearer of bad news? Or are you trying to prioritize CYA, covering your own behind and having stuff in writing? I'm not saying that you don't ever have to think about CYA, but I think our industry in general has gotten a bad reputation for prioritizing that over the effectiveness that the DOJ is always talking about. The effectiveness is going to take care of the CYA. I think a genuine pursuit of effectiveness is in itself a CYA. And so again, sometimes you have to kind of step into the fire if you're a fireman, right? You have to run into that fire, and that's what our job is. So prioritizing that face-to-face is so critical because, again, to Amy's point, you can see those changes in body language. You can see their face twist up, and you can see those instances, again, if you're prepared, where you might need to clarify or address or, uncover something that might be misinterpreted.
Yeah, and there's an in-between too that I didn't mention, but it's obvious. Phone. If you can't be in person, this is the order. Number 1, in person. Number 2, best is video. Number 3, best is telephone. You can hear their voice. You can, it's still a personal connection. And then really last is text. I would really use a text to just say, hey, I need to update you on something. You can use your psychological, preparing them in the text. You can say, hey, I've got something really important I need to tell you. Do you have 15 minutes tomorrow? And if you've done your practice, you could probably get through it in 15 minutes, and they'll give you more time if they feel they need the more time.
That's right. So we got a couple of questions from the chat. Lindsay asked a great one here. Thank you, Lindsay. How do you deliver bad news to a leader or manager who is unwilling to work with others or take accountability?
It's really hard. Yeah. Sometimes you're limited to at least letting them know because they expect to be informed. And then you need to have a second plan. I've been there and I get it, and it stinks. It's basically someone who's not doing their job, right, as a leader. So we don't have to take that path. We can be the leader we want to be. We are only in control of ourselves, ultimately. We could try to influence events, but if you cannot influence, and I certainly run into those in my coaching situations, you do what you can then to either work with your allies and your cross-functional partners that hopefully are relationships you may have established previously, or you move through your other steps and talk to either someone on that team who is accountable or who can help you, and you do the best you can in fixing the situation.
If you think about that type of person, that type of person who wants to push off accountability, it might be due to them not doing their job, whatever. At its core, it's like a core defensiveness. And what I've found is that people like that, they tend to need to find a villain. And maybe it goes back to what you're saying. It's this, lizard brain thing of us having to attach the negative to something, right? Because we're built for story, and whoever's bringing that is like, it's very easy to like on a subconscious level attach the negativity to that. You know, that shoot the messenger thing is not a new thing. That's been going on throughout history. And so to the extent possible, I think if you can address that and like head that off at the pass with this individual to where it's like not necessarily their fault unless it is, but in many cases, you know, especially in business, I mean, we talk about this a lot. A business is a very complex machine. There's all these human beings and market forces and regulations and all these different, you know, this like web that like you're trying to kind of like sort your way through. Very rarely is there a single point of failure, a single individual who pulled their finger out of the dike, you know, for, you know, the whole town to get flooded. And I think having a little bit of empathy, look, whether you like the person or not, you have to empathize with somebody if you're going to build trust with them, and you have to build trust in order to like persuade them, right? If they're going to digest the news that you're delivering and not erroneously like attribute blame to you, you have to be able to persuade them, and you have to be able to empathize with them. So the more you can do to kind of account for that audience, again, going back to that first point, like if you can account for the audience and you can sort of like deconstruct your adversary, the person that you're trying to convince, it's probably going to give you a lot more arrows in your quiver to maintain focus and maintain the persistence necessary to push to the next step.
And the next step actually may help out with this question, Nick.
Yeah.
Because, and this is convey benevolent, proactive intent. Yes. In terms of when you have a leader that you know is like the one you just described, our caller just described, that doesn't take accountability. And I also tend to find that those people also like to place blame because it's never their fault,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And they tend to be somewhat conflict avoidant. So they look for either passive aggressively or directly someone else to blame. So this next step is really important to help avoid, as we talked about in the first chance, it being ascribed to you personally, and for there to be baggage that's kind of built up quietly, potentially without you knowing. One of the best ways to counteract this lizard brain instinct for each of us as human beings to blame the messenger is to remind the person, and I think specifically in compliance, that you are here to help the company, and your role is to help the company prevent, detect, and deter illegal or unethical conduct. And so everything you're telling them, everything you're doing, and we'll get into how you share your action plan, is super important here because it counteracts the psychology of them looking for the person who done it, right?
Yep.
And so, you know, we want to, if you need to apologize immediately and directly, just simply, without justifying. We'll get to that step in number 5. But, you know, you want to tell the truth even when it hurts. Like, give them facts. This happened, this happened, this happened. You know, and you immediately move to potential solutions. You may or not have those yet, but you can share your plan or ask for permission for the plan, whatever the situation is. You could say, we've already, you know, done X or Y. We have contacted our attorneys. We have, you know, removed access from email for this person, and we're giving them a leave of absence. So let's say it's someone who had a major data breach and it was negligent, right? And you've been working with HR. You might share that. You might even have HR in the room with you, depending on the circumstances, whatever it is. Remind them that they hired you to do this job by expressing empathy for what's happened.
Right.
And that can
That's
be
right.
super helpful. And again, I think that's more subtle than what we're used to in our jobs.
I think that's spot on. And, you know, so much of this is like such a mindset game. I mean, these first couple of steps have all been about like getting our mindset right and making sure that we have the clarity we need in order to like deliver this effectively. That's kind of the key word here. And I think, you know, if you're a smoke detector, okay, like there's no smoke detectors that exist in your house that are scared to beep when there's fire. Like the smoke detector's not worried about the homeowner being like, how annoying the smoke detector is telling me that like there's a fire. Of course not. The smoke detector is going to go off when it needs to because that's its job. There's a fire suppression system that goes with it, and it can start sort of putting that out itself. But if we're going into it being like, oh my gosh, they're going to hate the sound of this beeping, well, that's going to prevent us from raising the alarm for the fire that's in place. It's part of our job. And again, we have to be careful about creating these self-fulfilling prophecies. If I'm coming in and I'm like, they're going to absolutely hate this, and they're going to shoot the messenger, and they're going to be so annoyed with me that I'm bringing bad news to them again, the odds of them landing in that position are just exponentially higher than if I'm going into that exact same conversation, literally saying the same words, but with a thought that says, this is my job. My job is to, like, you know, suppress this fire. My job is to notify folks because I am the circulatory system. I get this risk intelligence before anybody else. And my job is to convey, you know, confidently and with empathy, the steps that we're taking to, you know, put this fire out. But again, you can't stop yourself from beeping because the beeping is annoying. You know what I'm saying? That's like the job.
Yeah. Great analogy. And I'm seeing some comments here about that. It's a terrific analogy. Yeah. You can communicate the path forward, the efforts underway, get their input or feedback, get their permission to move forward. So again, we're thinking of the conversation holistically. This conversation is not simply to inform them that something bad happened. You don't stop there. You say, and it's an and now that you know, this is what we're doing about it. And then of course you can potentially give input unless they're the type of leader that just says, okay, well, I mean, I had one situation where one of our employees lost $400,000 that belonged to a client. You'll see that in the article if you read it. And that was when I was in my compliance CCO role. And he was, you know, I spoke to the president of our $90 billion business unit. He was not happy. And he said, okay. And I knew he just expected me to fix it. He said, okay, I want an update tomorrow. And I said, great, you know, and that was it. But right. So it could be long, it could be short. It just depends.
I think there's such a critical word in this fourth step, convey benevolent intent. And I think benevolence is sort of an outward focus. It's a focus on audience, a focus on others. And I think when we're in CYA mode, we're naturally sort of like dukes up. We're naturally sort of cornered animal type response. And that inherently is a very self-preservation thing. It's almost the antithesis of benevolence in a lot of ways. And I think if we're going to deliver the message benevolently with empathy, we have to put ourselves in that person's perspective. And like sometimes raising the alarm before you have anything in place in terms of like remediation ideas or whatever, that might not be as benevolent of a message if you paused for a little while and said, at least here's what my plan is. Again, you know, that call I made to my wife after my accident, I didn't call her as soon as it all happened because I was like, I don't want to freak her out. Like, I don't know how big of a deal this is. But once I had some clarity of like what's going to happen, what the next steps are, what the severity of the issue was, it was, you know, again, it's still a tough conversation, but like she was left in a relatively much better spot because she had some clarity versus like, you know, I mean, again, you kind of alluded to this. We all have this negativity bias. In the absence of information, our lizard brains, our subconscious naturally fills it in with like a negative scenario that's usually worse than what the actual scenario is.
Absolutely.
So if I told her that without, you know, whatever. So we have to think about those things. And really, you know, I just think this is such a key word of step 4, that benevolent intent that says, hey, I'm competent, I'm here, I'm focused on this issue, I have it framed out, I don't want you overreacting to this thing. Here are the steps that we have in place, or here's my plan to start putting steps in place, and here's a kind of a checkpoint where I can close the loop or at least give you some kind of an update. That's going to leave that person that you're delivering the news to in a relatively better position than they otherwise could be.
Well, and I'm hearing, Nick, that in that case, you knew to wait until you had more information. You didn't react. That you had the emotional intelligence to wait until you could tell your wife a more holistic picture of what was happening, which is what I would recommend in any case where you can. Now, I appreciate sometimes you're going to have a leader and you should always have an escalation protocol in advance so that you know what you must communicate. And I used to have to do that too when I had a parent company in Germany. I was required to report any whistleblower case and I had to quickly scope it. And I didn't always have all the details. So I'd make these 11 p.m. calls to Germany and just say, I just want you to know this came in. We do not have more facts yet. I would say, you know, it's a 3 out of a scale of 5. It could be this, it could be that. I will call you tomorrow with more information. So sometimes you are required, unfortunately, to let them know. And I do appreciate that. But when you can wait, like Nick explained, or I explained, and give more information, it's better if you're not literally required to report right away.
So on that point, so again, even the way you talked about that, there was a benevolent intent in that message delivery. even though that mandate on you, which was maybe unrealistic or maybe like an obnoxious mandate, obviously you couldn't control that. I'm sure it was not your, if you could have sort of scoped that, or you could have like influenced that, you probably wouldn't have thought it's a best practice to notify Germany after every single call, right?
But I would not. I did not like it, but it is what it is, right?
But it is what it is. So like part of our job is to like optimize whatever framework we're in. And like, if that framework is in place, you still kind of conveyed that benevolent intent, even, in the context of that thing. And so there's two quick questions here, which are kind of on topic. Like, Great. What strategy do you use when you're not in a position to discuss or influence a solution? And what do you do if you have no idea of a solution? I can't influence the solution that's necessary, or maybe a different situation. I don't even know how to attack it. How do we balance those things?
Yeah, the first, a little bit different, but the first one we get to actually a bit in 6, and that's a great question, because sometimes we do become aware of like an ethics issue that we are alerted to, but we actually need the CEO to take action or someone else to take action. So that's really important, and we need to influence others to do that. But we can do the analysis, I think, of why it's important. For example, if there's an undisclosed conflict of interest that we've learned about. Executives having an affair was one of my favorites that I had to deal with. I couldn't directly handle that one. But when you've got, apartment bed sheets being charged on the corporate credit card, and it's the worst kept secret in the world, it doesn't set a really great example for me enforcing the conflict of interest policy on much more minor things, right? So I get that. And so you have to have a highly influential conversation with that person. And you also, in addition to informing them, need to influence them on what the right thing is to do, and you do your best. So I was not always successful. And I think that is one of the hardest parts of our job. In that case I gave you, I was not successful. And that did not have great, that was not good for morale. And the company just decided to live with that, and I had to just move on. And it sucked, but there's nothing I could do. So that's one example of, okay, I did what I could. I tried to influence it. I explained the negative impact and how it was hard, how it would impact potentially other behavior downstream and create additional bad behavior. Because as we all know, the standard is set by the leaders. And I think of it like the limbo, like the lower the leader sets the pole, employees set it lower. And they're like, well, if they're doing that, I can do this because they get paid the big bucks. That's like, the justification for fraud and all kinds of things. So, it did bug me. It still bugs me. You could probably tell. And that was like 15 years ago. So
I think a key to this kind of a situation is like how and what questions. How do you plan, CEO, to message this once this gets out more? What are we going to do once this gets my problem, what I think is my problem, and that now makes it our problem. In order to get some kind of projection on what that future is going to look like versus me saying you need to message this way. So you have to play with like those how and what questions are extremely influential. They're extremely powerful because they naturally break a wall down and they build a bridge across the moat of like defensiveness, where my problem now becomes our problem and we have to collaborate on it. Maybe there's nothing you can do, and maybe it's 15 years from now and it's still going to be kind of stuck in your craw. But we can't just assume that, well, I can't do anything about that. Well, that's outside, that's above my pay grade and I just can't influence it. If you think you can't influence it, then you're right. There's usually a way to pick the lock. I would say there's always a way to pick the lock. But those how and what questions, really think about, like, those are highly strategic questions, and those can often get something unlocked. They can get something kind of unstuck by forcing someone to really engage in a different, engage a different part of their brain in kind of brainstorming a solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, leaders set the tone, as we know, and our sandbox is sometimes determined by that. And in these crucible moments, you find that out. And then it may impact your decision on how long you want to stay there.
I got a couple more questions that I'll work in on in a second here. But on this last point here about taking responsibility without deflecting blame, that's a good segue into the next one. But let's park on that for a quick second. How do we take responsibility without deflecting blame in a benevolent way?
So step number 5, Nick, the explain without justifying, or so this is where it's important just to present the facts comprehensively that you know at the time. And you may have to say, this is what I know now. I will get back to you as soon as I have more facts, that kind of thing. Again, depending on the severity of the issue and whatever your escalation protocol or relationship is with your colleague that you're talking to, or your boss. I think in our role, we want to avoid assigning blame early on. I think it's important to allow the decision maker, or again, when you're talking up, to be assessing that, and you can talk about that later. Right now, you're literally in delivery mode. And again, it's really about preparing them to hear you. If you had a hand in it, or your team had a hand in it, you want to absolutely avoid making excuses that makes you look like a bad leader. You're being accountable is so clear, as we know, and as everyone just pointed out. You want to focus on being really clear and transparent, because that increases trust to you, which again gets over that psychological bias of not trusting you, of not wanting to believe it. So that's very, very important to just be really clear, really straightforward, take it on the chin. We all know leaders who do that, and leaders who waffle, like the CEO that cried when he had to let 2,000 people go or something. That didn't go so well, right? Because he was thinking about himself. He's like, this is so painful for me too. And everyone's like,
and he was on his pool. It was like all that like Spanish marble on his in his patio.
It's like, who was advising
wiping
this
his
guy?
eyes with hundreds. Yeah.
And he's crying, and everyone's like, yeah, we feel real sorry for you. You still got a job. Like, he genuinely probably felt that way. He probably didn't create a company where he wanted to lay off people, right? You and I know that, Nick.
Right.
But that's the part where you do the prep, and like, that's about you, and you're being selfish if when you're conveying to someone else who's going to potentially get hurt or have something bad put on their plate, you need to focus on them, not yourself.
Yeah, and that is so, that's such a great analogy with that weeping CEO, because the focus, it's a self-focus. It's again that
selfish. It's really selfish.
It's absolutely selfish, because it's that's a very basic defense mechanism to pull pity, right? Like pity. If I can evoke pity from you, well, then the odds of you attacking me are a lot lower. That's why some animals sort of play dead. That's a play dead kind of a response. And I think like assigning blame is that type of thing as well. And so when we're coming into that conversation defensive, not only do we increase the odds, like not only is that like selfish, it categorically is, we're also increasing the odds that they are going to smell that and they're going to attack more. Usually, usually it's not us asleep at the switch. Usually it's something that happened, and business is messy. Like I keep saying, like fraud is going to happen, wrongdoing is going to happen, sexual harassment is going to happen, because it's a bunch of human beings who are, self-focused and so forth, like at their, innate state. So the worst thing we can do again is to come with that kind of that defensive kind of like posture to try to like prove our worth or to try to defend our worth. We prove our worth in, a fireman's like worth is proven when they're fighting the fire. Like that's when we prove our worth, not by defending, defending ourselves. And I get it. It's a natural thing. Like, we had hired an executive. This was crazy. Me and my brother, we had hired an executive a couple years back, and it was like a first big hire in this certain department, and it was a big spend for us. And we read all the books about like how to hire right, and we had like this really like dialed in process. And it was definitely not it was definitely a hire slow type of a scenario. And like 6 months in, it started to become increasingly clear that this person wasn't a good fit, and there was a lot of anxiety we had to go present that to the board and say, hey, we kind of had a false start with this individual. We need to find somebody else. And as we were kind of brainstorming how we were going to message that and kind of getting on the same page, my brother and I, there were, my first run through of that messaging, there was some like defensiveness in it. And it was just like, they don't want to
Okay.
hear that defensiveness. Like,
Yeah, that's
it doesn't
great that
serve
you
me well at
practice.
all. You know what I'm saying? Like, when we practiced it more, we were able to kind of dial it, you know, I mean, we hadn't read this, and had we read it, we probably would have done better, but dial it down to like, well, what actually happened? Like, you know, here's where we, you know, think we went wrong. But really kind of focusing on what we're going to do to fix it. And I was talking to another team that earlier, or about a week or so ago, and there was a lot of anxiety that they had about, you know, having chosen what was clearly the wrong like helpline vendor, and they had a ton of anxiety about going and presenting that to the board. And what I often find is that, you know, in my own experience, like in this example that I'm talking about, the board was way less like angry about it than I was expecting them to be. You know, I had blown this up in my mind and my own self-focus and so forth. And they were really like, hey, you know what? Okay, all good. Let's just fix it. And the same thing with this team I was talking to. The anxiety that they had around delivering the bad news was, well, you know, way bigger than you know, the negative, you know, like the conversation didn't go nearly as bad as they thought it would, you know?
Which is wonderful. And I can tell you that I get sent a lot of clients by companies who reach out before the executive even knows, and they say, we have a problem. This executive has damaged their relationship with the CEO, and they need coaching to fix it. And usually they've done something not this.
Right.
There's been some communication, and some CEOs are very judgmental, and they get one bad experience, and you are on the naughty list.
Right.
And it is one more step between that and losing your job. And so this is part of the reason why I wrote this. And I should warn people, when you read the journal article, and please do, I spent a year writing it, and I promise it's fun. It's
worth the read for sure. Yeah,
it's
really
written
good.
for executives, because my other mission, and if anyone else has the ability to spread this out or wants to give me ideas, please do, because we need to get this information to executives as well. They need to understand that they have to prepare themselves to listen and be ready to listen. There's two sides to this equation, right? To the person who said, you know, people that avoid accountability. So you will notice that, unlike most of my material, which is written for you, this is written for, and I intentionally worked pretty hard to get it into a CEO journal so that they have a more delicate understanding of this, because it's not always on their radar.
Well, and also think about this, like the person that you're delivering the bad news to, let's just say it's a CEO, they're dealing with bad news all the time, and they're probably reporting bad news to their board as well. So this is a muscle that they've probably had to develop to some degree. So if you're trying to elevate and not be kiddie table, cost center, you know, barnacle on the ship type, and really more of that, you know, trusted advisor, strategic partner to the organization, when you can show yourself as a compliance executive versus a compliance officer or whatever, by, you know, communicating to them the way that they would like to communicate to their boss, then that kind of puts you on a different level. And one other thing I want to say about step 5 before we get to the last one is, like, when we are in justification mode, we're looking in the rear view mirror usually, and we're explaining kind of how we got here. And we're trying to say, well, these are, you know, these circumstances happen and these circumstances happen. But like, if you look at your car, the rear view mirror is way smaller than your windshield. And so like use that as a proportion on like where your focus is. You shouldn't be spending most of your time talking about how we got here unless that person wants to have that kind of a discussion. Your natural discussion should really be about like, how are we going to make progress? How are we going to put this fire out? So let's dive into this last one about the
last one's really important for compliance, and it gets to the earlier question, I think, of how do you influence. I can't remember the exact framing, but this can be important. The 6th step isn't important in all conversations, but it's important when you are delivering news about something really important that has to change, and you need executive support to do it. And that often happens in our role, right? So many of you may be familiar with, sorry, that's just keeping me honest. Many of you may be familiar with John Cotter's 8 steps of change management. I've reduced them to 5. Some of you may have seen my articles. I have hundreds of free articles on my website. Feel free to go under resources and use it. But the one that becomes important is urgency is the number one thing needed for change. You must have a burning platform. And so what is tempting as a bad news deliverer is to downplay the significance of the issue and the risk at hand.
Right.
And that is, again, a cop-out. That is, especially when it's something really important that needs to change in the organization, you need to keep the heat on it. You need to keep the urgency so that the person you're talking to walks away with, okay, this happened, this sucks, and I need to think about how I'm going to, and you can help them with this, who I need to bring together, who may be in charge of changing it, whether it's a marketing policy or sales compensation issue, right? That would not be very popular, but may need to happen. Like, you start thinking about that, because downplaying the severity of the issue removes the number one thing you need for change in your organization. Change does not happen without a sense of urgency. It's dead in the water. So you want to avoid that.
And, we talk about this all the time. If you're trying to drive a new action, that's going to take some kind of an influence. You're talking to a rock. You got to get that rock moving. So we can't just lean on logic. Like, logic is going to make you think, but emotion is going to make you act. And so that sense of urgency, you have to put some emotion into it to get that rock moving. So this was a phenomenal. We're a minute over here, but I hope you guys found this valuable. If you don't follow Amii online, absolutely need to go to her LinkedIn right now and follow her. If you're in any of these issues, or you just want some coaching to really elevate your career, she is phenomenal. I can't recommend her enough. Round of applause to all you guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. Over
Great questions.
3,500 emojis. That kind of averages out to 1 per second. So that means there was something each second of this talk that was phenomenal. So thank you guys all for coming. Join us next week. We have Matt Kelly and the one and only Karen Moore to do our quarterly update of everything in the news.
They're great.
Bring your friends.
They're great.
Bring your team, and we'll see you next time. Amii, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.